No more debug menu. No more debug menu. So today we're going to create 3 overworld level in which the player is going to be able to move around, select the unit, trigger combats, play the game as it should without going through the debug menu, because the debug menu is pretty nice, but it's not going to be in the final game. Or even if it is, the player should not have to go through the debug menu to start a combat. That's not really fun. So let's remove the debug menu, start the combat the way they should, and let's get to it. So in Unreal, the first thing we're going to do is create all the different overworlds we want to use. So let's go in the maps folder. I'm going to create myself one new folder that I'm going to name Overworlds. Here you go. And inside that new folder, I'm going to create a new level, which I'm going to name L_overworld_square. So I'm going to open that one. That one's going to be the overworld for the square map. Now we need to add a few sub-levels in there. So we have the lighting level that we use in the entry level. And we also need the L square because that's the overworld for the square map. Here you go. So now we have the map set up properly. We just need a few more things though. On the right here, we still need to add all the different blueprints we created. So the combat system, the player actions, and things like that. So let's create a new folder for it. I gave it the same name as the level. So L_overworld_square. And now the first thing we need is the player start to decide where the player is going to spawn in the world. So I'm going to go in my place actor right here and drop the player start in my level. You can place it wherever you want. In my case, I'm just going to place it right here. It doesn't really matter. Then we need the player action, so the player is able to interact with the world. So I'm just going to go search for my player action right here and drop it in the world. I'm going to put it in the right folder, so L on overworld square right here. I'm going to move the player start as well. There you go. So now I have my player action and my player start. The next thing we need is the combat system to be able to trigger a combat, obviously. So combat system, here it is. I'm just going to drop it in the level. The location doesn't really matter for now. I'm just going to place it in the same folder. Then in the combat system here, we can see that it needs a grid to be able to work properly. So I'm just going to create my grid in my level. So get my BP grid and drop it inside the level right here. I'm going to move it under the combat system, the same way we did in the level entry. I'm going to center it on it, doesn't really matter. But in my case, I'm doing it anyway. And then in the combat system here, we can now assign the grid. So I can just select my grid right here, BP grid, here we go. So now that's done, the combat system is set up properly. Now let's go back in the player actions right here to assign the combat system to the player action. So in the player action right here, combat system, here we go. Now the combat system is set up properly. And the last thing we need is the overworld unit group manager, because in this level, we're going to use the overworld movement. If you're not going to, you don't need to set one. But in my case, since I want to use the overworld movement in this level, I'm going to also add it in the level. So overworld unit group manager, which is right here. I can just drop it in the level, put it in the right folder with everything else. And now in the player action, I can just select my overworld unit group manager like that. Here we go. So now all the blueprint components are set up properly and the level is ready to be used. But before going to the next step, let's just press play to see if it works. So let's press play. Okay, everything's black. And I think that's because, yes, in the level right here, we're never loading the lighting or the level square because we don't have any blueprint that is loading levels anymore. We have to do it manually. So I'm just going to stop, and actually in that case, I always want my level to be always loaded. So I'm just going to change the streaming method to always loaded. Here we go. So my lighting is always going to be visible and my level square is also going to always be visible. Now if I press play, yes, I have my level that is working. I have my grid generated on it and I can move around the same way we were moving in the level entry. Perfect. So now everything is set up properly. We can go to the next step. Next step, which is to add the units in the overworld. So let's create a new folder to receive all the units, which I'm going to name units_player. These are going to be the units controllable by the player. And I'm going to move that folder inside the L_overworld_square. Here you go. Now we have a nice folder and we can put the units inside it. So let's go look for the BP units. Here we go, and drop them inside the level. In my case, I'm just going to place it, I'd say, right here. It doesn't really matter. You can place them wherever you want. Just make sure that you are in the persistent level though. Double click on the persistent level, make it blue right here. That way you know that you're placing the units in the right level. Perfect. So now my units is on the grid. I'm going to move it inside the nice folder we created. Here you go. And I'm also going to rename it because we're going to have a bunch of units in the overworld and we want to be able to easily identify them. So let's rename the BP unit right here to BP unit. In my case, I also added _group1. This unit is going to be inside the first group that is in my overworld. That's why I named it the group 1. Here we go. And finally, at the end of the name, I'm just leaving the class of my unit. That way, it's super easy to identify them. Perfect. So now we have the nice unit in the overworld. It's identified properly, now we can add all the other units we want to add in the overworld. So for my second unit, I named it BP unit underscore group 2 because we're going to start a new group, and that one is also a warrior. So I left it a warrior. Then I'm going to add a third unit right here, a priest this time. So BP underscore unit underscore group 2. It's going to be in the same group as the second warrior, just like that. And that one is a priest. I changed the unit data right here, the unit type, to be a priest. So I named it also priest at the end, just so it's easy to identify them. Then I'm going to start a third group. So I'm going to add myself one other unit right here, another warrior this time. So BP unit group 3 underscore warrior. And then why not adding a little ranger in there? So BP unit group 3 underscore ranger, and change the unit type to be a ranger. Here you go. And finally, why not a priest in that team too? So let's add another priest right here. So unit type is set to a priest, and the name is group 3 underscore priest. So all these three units are grouped together, then these two units are grouped together, and that one is alone. So we have three groups in the overworld right now. Now these groups are controllable by the player, so the player can move them around and attack all the different encounters, but now we don't have any encounters. So let's just create a new folder for the encounters. So I'm just going to collapse all that. Here we go. Create a new folder, units underscore encounter, and move it inside the L overworld square like the other one. And we're gonna start with a nice group of chicken right here in the top left corner. So 1 chicken, 2 chicken, 3 chicken, and 4 chicken. Here we go. So this is going to be the group 4. So I named them BP underscore unit underscore group 4 because we have three groups right here controllable by a player. So group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. And that one is going to be controlled by the AI. It's going to be an encounter. So I added that in the name. So underscore AI. And then I ended the name the same way I did for all the other units with the type of the unit. So these are chickens. So chicken 1, chicken 2, chicken 3, and chicken 4. And also don't forget to change the unit type to be a chicken. Otherwise, that's not going to be a chicken. And you want it to be a chicken, so change it to a chicken. Here you go. So we have the group 4. Now the player is going to be able to select one of those three groups here in the bottom left corner and attack the group in the top left corner, which are the chickens. That's good, but it's a bit boring. We only have one encounter possible. That's not good. Now let's add another bunch of encounters. Let's add the group 5 in the bottom right corner right here. And I'm going to start the group with 2 bats. So I'm adding 2 bats in the group 5. So BP unit underscore group 5 underscore AI. That's also going to be an encounter controlled by the AI. And I named them bat 1 and bat 2 and change the unit type to be a bat. And in that group, I'm also going to add other types of unit. I'm going to add 2 chickens. Why not? So group 5, these are also in the same group. These chicken are in the same group as the bat. So when the player attacks that group, it's going to also attack the chickens, not only the bats. So, okay, attack the bat, the chicken in the group 5, controlled by the AI, chicken 1, chicken 2, unit type chicken. And finally, why not adding 2 slimes in there? So I'm going to add 2 slimes in the group 5, also same group 5, AI, slime 1, and slime 2. Perfect. So now we have 2 groups of encounter. Let's add more. I'm going to add myself another group right here, a little row of slimes, 5 slimes in the group 6. So I have unit underscore group 6 underscore AI underscore slime 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we go. 5 slimes in the group 6. Now create the group 7. Here it is. 3 bats in the group 7. Why not? It doesn't really matter. So group 7, bat 1, 2, 3. Finally, the group 8, why not in the top right corner? Then let's say a group 8 in the top right corner right here. So group 8, AI bat, AI chicken, and AI slime, one of each. That's good. Then why not having a few groups that are only 1 unit? Because we have group of 4, group of 3, 5, 6. There's a bunch of different sizes, but we don't have single units. So let's do that. I'm going to create myself the group 9 right here, which is going to be a slime, group 9 underscore AI underscore slime 1. Then I'm going to have a chicken right here for the group 10. So group 10 AI chicken. And finally the group 11, which is going to be an AI bat. Here we go. So now we have a bunch of encounters that the player can attack. So the player is going to control all those groups in the bottom left corner and then move around in the world and attack any of those encounters. Perfect. So we're done with the overworld for the square level. So that's pretty good. We have all the units and the units that are controllable by the player. That's good. Now, before jumping in the code, we're going to do the other map. So in my case, I'm going to have a map for my square level, a map for my hexagon, and a map for my triangle. And that's also going to simulate the fact that in your game, you're probably going to have multiple levels, maybe 500, 200 maps, or maybe just 5, whatever. But the game should be able to switch between those levels and continue playing the game. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have the possibility to choose which map we want to play, and then we'll be able to move around with our units and then attack all the other units. But before we do that, just make sure that your units are named properly in your level, because I'm going to be lazy in my case and I'm just going to duplicate this level and use it as template for my other different levels and different grid shapes. So I just want to make sure that all my units are named properly, they are easily identifiable, and then we can reuse those units in all the other levels. And that's just going to make sure that all our levels are clean and organized. And obviously in your game, I'm pretty sure you're not going to just duplicate all the units, so maybe it doesn't matter in your case if you are building your own levels. But in my case, since I'm going to be lazy, I'm just going to duplicate everything, and then, well, I want to keep all my units named properly because, well, I'm just going to reuse them in all my levels. Good. Okay, so now all my units are named properly and it's pretty nice. Now we can go create the next level, which is going to be the hexagon map. So in my map folder, in my overworlds, I'm going to duplicate L overworld square and rename it to L overworld underscore hexagon this time, and open it. And here we don't have much to do. We just have to remove the square level and replace it by the hexagon. So let's just delete that one, remove selected. Here you go. Unreal is not happy, but whatever. And then in the maps, in the sublevel, we can add the hexagon level instead. Here we go. Now the only step that is left is to just move the unit back on the level, because right now they are a little bit outside of bounds because, well, the map don't match. So I'm just going to reorganize my units a little bit. I'm just going to move them all around just to make sure that they are on top of the world. There we go, so that's how it looks. I just moved all the player units right here in the bottom right corner. All the other units are just moved in other places on the grid, the way I wanted them to be on the grid. It doesn't really matter because they are going to move anyway. So yeah, here are all my little groups on the level. And now if I press play, well, we just have the units visible because the level hexagon is not always loaded by default. So let's just press stop and change the streaming method of the level hexagon right here to always loaded, the same way we did for the square. Now if we press play, we shall now have all the units on the level and we can move around. Here we go. It seems to work as expected. Perfect. Now we just have the third level to do, so I'm just gonna go in my overworld right here, duplicate the overworld hexagon this time, why not, doesn't really matter, and replace it by L overworld triangle. Now we can open the triangle overworld and we're gonna do the exact same thing. I'm just going to remove the level hexagon, so remove selected. Here we go. Go in my sublevels, take the level triangle and drop it in my level. Here we go. Now I'm just going to move my units around just so they are aligned with the grid. And that's how it looks. So I removed all my units controlled by a player in the bottom left corner, and all the other ones are just aligned in some random places on the grid, just like that. Perfect. Now if I press play, only the units are visible because the level triangle is not visible by default. So I'm just going to stop and change the streaming method to always loaded. Here we go. Now if I press play, all my units and my level are visible and we can move around and look at them. That's pretty nice. Now we're ready to ask the unit to move in the overworld and attack each other. But to do that, I'm just going to go back in my level overworld square because I prefer that one. So I'm just going to go back in there and we're going to work right here. And before we go ask the unit to move around, there's one thing I would like to fix, and that's the grid right here. If we move the grid around, we can see that the grid appears on the level, and that's not good. We don't want the grid to appear on the level in the overworld. We just want to have it in the game. So right now, if I press play, let's say I have my grid in the overworld, and that's not what we want. We don't want to have a grid in the overworld only when we start a combat. So what I'm going to do is just on my grid right here, switch the grid shape to none, and that way we don't have a grid in the overworld, and that's exactly what's happening. I don't have a grid in the overworld, that's good, but I have a bunch of errors now. It says invalid none, and that makes sense because the grid shape none, well, it's invalid. So let's just remove that error, and that's going to be inside the BP grid right here. We're going to go in the function spawn grid, so where we are spawning the grid in the world. We're going to move on the right a little bit, and after destroying the grid, before spawning a new grid, we're going to check if the grid shape is not equal to none, because we don't want to spawn a none grid. So I'm just going to go add this right here. So if the grid shape is not equal to none, then we can spawn a new grid. But there's just one little bug with that. Right now in 4.25, which is the version I'm using, Unreal seems to have some issues with the child actor components, and it doesn't seem to be able to reset properly those components in half of the situation. Yeah, that's pretty weird. But yeah, there's a little workaround. We just have to toggle the non-grid shape twice, and then it works. It clears the grid properly. Otherwise, you still have have a grid visible, and that's not what you want. And I've tested it in 5.1 and it seems to work properly, so that's weird. It's probably just in 4.25. It's probably also fixed in 4.27 because it's a more stable version. But in my case, since I'm still using 4.25, I'm just gonna add my little workaround right here. And I know that if I want to remove the grid from the world, I just have to toggle the option to none twice in a row. And that's exactly what we're gonna test. So I'm gonna go back in my level right here. I have my square grid and I can move it around, and that works. That's pretty good. Now I'm gonna switch it back to none. And yeah, I have a grid in my overworld. That's not good. If I move it around, yeah, I still have my grid. It's not generating itself. It's just visible there. It's just annoying, but I don't have any errors. So that's pretty good. Now I'm just going to go back in square to reset it and then go back in none. And now I don't have the grid, and that's how you fix the bug, I guess. If you go in the grid shape and then you go back to none, I have the bug, and then I go back in the grid shape, and then I go back to none, and the bug is fixed. That's just annoying, but whatever. There's a workaround. It works pretty well. Kinda. And since it's not an issue in newer version of the engine, I don't think it's worth spending too much time on it. So now if I press play, yeah, I don't have a grid in the overworld, and that's exactly what I want. Perfect. So now I don't have the grid in the overworld. I can ask my units to move around. But to be able to do that, we need the Overworld Unit Group Manager to be aware of all the units that are currently in the overworld, to be able to first ask the AI to move around and also to react properly when the player moves its unit on the overworld. But right now, well, we don't have a way to feed all the units to the Overworld Group Manager. There's no function anywhere that does that. So what we're going to do is create ourselves a new blueprint that its only purpose is going to feed all the units to the Overworld Unit Group Manager and then starts the gameplay loop. So let's go do that. I'm going to go in my, let's say, blueprints folder and create myself one new folder right here, which I'm going to name other, because it's not really going to be core features of the game. It's pretty specific to those levels, the levels that are pre-made, that already have units in them, and we just want to start the gameplay loop using those objects. So we just need a blueprint that is going to be responsible to start the gameplay loop using everything that it's in the level. So I'm just going to create myself a new folder right here, which I'm going to name a scenario, because that's what we're going to create. We're going to create a few scenarios, the scenario with the square map, the scenario with the triangle map, and also the scenario with the hexagon map. So inside that folder, now I can finally create my blueprint class, which is going to be an actor, and I'm going to name it BP_overworld scenario, because in the next video, we're going to create another type of scenario, a scenario that is going to start the combat right away, skipping the overworld section completely. So we're going to have that other type of scenario in the next video. But for now, let's focus on the overworld one. So let's open the blueprint right here. I'm going to go in the graph, and we're going to start by creating ourselves two new variables. So one variable, two variables. The first variable is going to be of type Overworld Unit Group Manager, which is why I named it Overworld Unit Group Manager, and I also made it instance editable so we can set it in the editor in the level. So that was for the first one, and the second one is my unit groups, and it is the same type of variable that we already have in the Overworld Unit Group Manager. So we have a mapping from an integer to the S Overworld Unit Group structure, and this is the variable that we're going to populate in the editor, and then we're going to pass all those informations to the Overworld Unit Group Manager, because, well, that's what's handling the game. So that's why we have to feed it all the information it needs. And to do that, well, we need that variable to be instance editable, because we want to set it in the editor in the level. So good, now the two variables are set properly, and now we just have to feed all the unit group information to the Overworld Unit Group Manager. And to do that, it's actually super simple. I'm just gonna go in the begin play right here. Gonna start by looping through all the units groups that we have, and for all the groups, I'm going to loop through all the units, and we're going to add them into the real Overworld Unit Group Manager in its real structure. So here I'm going to go on the right a little bit. The first step is just going to be to enable the unit in the overworld. So set the unit context to overworld so we are able to move it in the overworld, and then we can simply add it to the group in the Overworld Unit Group Manager. So we can just feed it the unit and the group ID, and now the unit is in a real group in the Overworld Unit Group Manager. And now the last step is simply to use this is encounter variable to decide if the group is going to be an encounter or not, and that's what I'm gonna do right here. Here we go. In the Overworld Unit Group Manager, I'm just doing a set group is encounter, feeding it if the group is an encounter or not, and also the group ID, obviously. Perfect. Now we should be able to compile and save, and as soon as we set those two variables in the editor, we should be able to see some unit moving around. So let's go do that. I'm gonna go back in the editor. I'm just going to drop the BP Overworld scenario in there. Here we go. The location doesn't really matter. We can just place it there, and also I'm going to move it in the right folder, so in the L Overworld Square folder right here. So now it's nice and organized. Now we just have to set those two variables. So first the Overworld Unit Group Manager, we can just select it from the drop-down menu just like that. And then we have to populate all the unit groups using all the units that are in the level right now. So all those groups right here, we have to put them in the units group variable. So let's create a new input for it. This group ID is going to be the ID1 because I'm starting my group IDs to 1 right here. I'm not starting to 0. So let's make it 1. Why not? Then we can expand that. It asks for the group ID again. I'm just going to write 1 again so they match because it makes sense. Then for the units, I'm just going to add a new units in there, and that's going to be the warrior that is in the group 1 right here. Here we go. So now my team 1 is built using the warrior that is in my level. So good. Group 1 done. Now I'm just going to go back in my overworld scenario, and now we're going to do the other group. So let's collapse this one and add a new entry. This one is going to be the group ID 2. We can expand that also. The group ID right here is going to be 2 as well. And then in the units, I'm going to add 2 units because I have 2 units in my group 2. So I'm going to add my priest and also my other warrior. Here we go. Now we can collapse this one and then add the group 3. So add the group 3. I'm gonna go do the ID for the group 3 right here and then add 3 units in there. Actually, I'm not gonna do that manually because it's going to take forever. I have what, 11 groups and I have all those groups in the other levels also. I don't want to do that manually every time. It's a waste of time because we already have all those informations in the unit's name. We have the group right here, the unit type, which doesn't really matter in our case, but for the AIs right here with the encounter groups, we have the AI in the names also. So we have all the group ID and all the information we need to decide if the group is going to be an encounter or not, and add all those units automatically in the groups. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to create a function to add all the units that are in the level inside those groups. So let's go back in the BP Overworld scenario and add a new function. So new function right here to do all that. I named it build the unit groups based on units name because that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take all the names of the units and build groups with them. And then what I'm going to do is go in the top right corner right here and check the call in editor checkbox right here. And what that does is that if you compile and save your blueprint, now you can go back in the overworld and select the BP Overworld scenario in your level. And now you should see that you now have a button right here, and you can click on this button and it's going to execute all the logic that you wrote inside that function, and that function is going to take all the units that are in the overworld right now and put them into the unit groups. So let's go do that. Let's go back in there and do the logic. And that's how it's gonna go. First thing first, we have to clear the unit groups variable just like that. That way, if we click on the button multiple times, it's not going to add more data in there over and over and over. It's going to first clear the data and replace it with new fresh data. So that's pretty good. Now we have to take all the units that are in the world right now. So we can just simply do a get all actor of class just like that using the BP unit. That's going to give us all the units that are currently in the world. And now we can loop through all of them. I promoted that into a new local variable right here just because it's cleaner, and now we can add those units into all the proper groups. And the first thing we need to be able to do that is the group ID, in which group we want to be able to add the unit. So I'm just gonna move on the right here, and we're gonna find out which is the group ID of our unit based on the unit name. So this is the unit's name right now. It's written group 7 right here, and that's the 7 we want to use for the group ID. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're splitting on the word group, which is going to give us a string that looks like that, starting with 7. And now if we split this new string using the underscore, it's going to isolate the 7 right here, and that's going to be the group ID. So now we know in which group we want to add the unit. The second thing we need to know is if the group is going to be an encounter or not, and we're going to figure that out using the display name once again. If the unit's name contains underscore AI, just like that, it means that the group is going to be an encounter. So that boolean right here is going to be true, and we're going to mark this group as an encounter. Perfect. So now we have all the information we need to add the units into the group. So let's do that. I'm gonna go on the right here. Start by getting the current group from the units group. If it's the first time we use this group ID, it's going to create a new group for us that we can now add new units in there. But if there is already a group using that group ID, it's going to give us the group, and now we can continue adding units in that specific group. But before we add the unit in the group, let's just set the default variable, so the group ID and also the encounter. So now the group knows if it's an encounter or not, and also its group ID. Now we can just simply add the units in there. So let's break the group and do an add using the unit. Now the unit is in the group, and now we just have to take the group and put it back inside the mapping, and that's what we're we're doing right here, using the unit groups, adding the group ID and the group. Perfect. Now we should be able to compile, save, go back in the level, click on the button, and it should populate the units group for us. So let's go do that. I'm gonna go in my level, select the BP Overworld scenario. Here we already have the 3 groups we already created, but I don't care about those. I'm just going to click on the button and it should populate all the groups using all the units that are in my level, and that's what it's doing. I have my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth groups, and they all have all the units that are supposed to be in those. So in my group 11, for example, the group ID is 11. That's good. The units that are in the group, there's only one, and it is my BP unit group AI BAT1 group 11 right here. And since there's AI in its name, this group is an encounter. Perfect. Now I'm just gonna check the group 3 because I know that it should have 3 units in there, 3 units controlled by the player, so a priest, a ranger, and a warrior. And this group is not an encounter because it's controlled by the player. There's no AI in their name. Perfect. Let's look at another one for fun. So I have my group 6 right here. The group ID is 6, which makes sense. It is an encounter, obviously. And also for the units right here, it contains all the slimes in the group 6, which are the slimes that are right here. Group 6, group 6, group 6. Perfect. So now all the units are in the proper groups. And now if you use that blueprint in many levels, you just have to click on the button right here, build unit groups based on unit name, and it's going to generate that list for you every time. You don't have to do it manually, and that's pretty nice. Perfect. So now the Overworld Unit Group Manager should be aware of all the units that are in the world. So if I press play, they should start moving. Okay, they're not. All the encounters are just stuck in place. Okay, that's not great. Okay, let's go see what's the problem. And actually, I didn't find any clean solution for that because I think it's an engine problem once again. And I just tried a few things and figured out that I think that's because of the character movement component. So what I'm gonna do is just go in the overworld scenario, just right here. I'm gonna go in the event graph, and at the beginning of the begin play, before doing everything else and enabling all the units in the overworld, I'm just going to add myself a small delay right here. A very small delay. It's just to skip the first frame because I think that the character movement component is not enabled on the first frame, like it needs 1 frame to get active. That's pretty weird. But anyway, if I compile and save, now I can go back in my level, press play, and now all the encounter group starts to move because, well, it seems to work. That's just how it is, I guess. And now we just have one last thing to do, and it is to give the player the possibility to select and move all the groups that he's supposed to be able to control. Right now, he cannot select anything and move anything, and that's just because the default action in the player action is actually nothing. The player is not able to do anything by default, so now what we're going to do is just enable those actions when we want to automatically select the action that are giving the player the possibility to move the units in the overworld for those scenarios. So for the L overworld underscore square and also the other levels that are in the same kind of level, so the overworld levels, we want the player to automatically be able to move units in the overworld between combats. So what we're going to do is just stop right here and go in the player action. So player action right here, open the BP player action, and what we're going to do is create ourselves a new variable. So new variable right here, I named it auto select overworld movement actions. It's pretty long, but it's pretty specific. We want the player to be able to automatically select the overworld action when he wants to. That's good. Just make sure to open the little eye icon because we want to set the value of that variable in the levels, depending if we want the player to do that or not, being able to automatically select those actions or not, and make sure that the default value of that variable is also false because we don't want it to break everything else we did so far, because right now the player is automatically deselecting everything between combat. We want to add a feature and not break the current logic, so make it false for now. Let's compile this and go set it in the level because we're thinking about it. So let's do that. I'm gonna go in my player action right here and check this new checkbox right here to automatically select the overworld movement actions for this specific level. That's pretty good. Now I'm gonna go back in my BP player action and I'm gonna go in my begin play, which is actually where I was right now. So at the begin play, at the end, all the way at the end, if the overworld unit group manager is valid, then we're also going to check, okay, do we want to automatically select those actions, the movement action? So just like that, I'm going to do a little if checking my boolean, and then I'm going to select some actions, and the actions are the action select unit in the overworld for the left click, so left click selecting a unit in the overworld, and right click action is going to be the move unit in overworld. So we're going to select a unit and move a unit in the overworld. That's super simple. And that's it. Now the player should be able to select the units and move them around at the beginning of the game. There's just one other place though we have to add a little bit of logic, and it is inside the uncombat ended, because right here at the end of the combat, when the combat is over, we are selecting nothing as action. We want to deselect all the action because we don't want the player to be able to automatically do something by default at the end of the combat. But in this case, if this boolean is true, well, instead of deselecting all the actions that are currently selected, we're simply going to switch them to the overworld action. So I'm just going to move this out of the way a little bit, re-add my little branch just like that right here, the same way we had in the begin play. And if it's false, I'm going to deselect everything. So at the end of the combat, if I'm automatically selecting the overworld action, I'm going to select them. That's as simple as that. So select the unit in overworld and move unit in overworld. And then, well, if it's false, I'm just going to deselect everything the same way I was doing before. Perfect. Now we should be able to compile save, go in the level, select the units that are in the bottom left corner and ask them to move around just like that. Moving my units on the grid. I can attack an enemy group. So I'm going to attack all those bats right here. Here we go. I can move around. So I'm going to move around, attack some units. Can I attack? Oh, here we go. Oops, that's just moving. Here we go. I'm attacking the units. Going to end my turn, end my turn, end my turn. The bats should be able to move around. Here we go. They are attacking me too, I guess. Are they? They're not. Oh, it doesn't have enough range, I guess. Whatever. So yeah, the bats are moving around trying to attack me, but they are not able to. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, anyway, I'm just going to end the combat. The units are back in the overworld, so I can start moving around the same way I was doing before, just like that. Move around, attack other units, and it seems to work as expected. That's pretty good. So now I can start and end as many combat as I want, just like that. Woo, I got attacked by the bat this time. That's good. Okay, so good. That seemed to work. Now we just have to go back in the other levels real quick to set first this new checkbox in the player action, and also the overworld scenario. We have to populate the unit groups in the other levels also, because we only did it in the level square. So let's go back in the map in the overworld and open the overworld hexagon first. And here, first thing to do is to go in the player action to check the auto select overworld movement actions, just like that. And then in the levels, I guess we don't have the scenario yet, so I'm gonna go in my other scenarios and add my blueprint scenario in the level, just like that right here. Put it in the right folder, overworld hexagon. I can populate the overworld unit group manager, set the variable, and then click on the button to populate all the unit groups that are currently in the world, the same way we did for the square level. Here we go. Now I should be able to play the game and move the units around and start combats if I want to. If they reach the chickens, here we go. It started the combat. I can end the combat and continue. Here we go. It works perfectly in the hexagon level now. Good. Now let's go do the last one. So in my overworld, I'm gonna go in my triangles this time. Save this one. Gonna go on the right in the player action, check the auto select overworld movement as we did, and then in the other scenarios, add the scenario in the level, put it in the right folder. So in the overworld triangle, populate the overworld unit group manager, and also click on the button to generate the group list. Here we go. Now all the units are in the groups, and I should be able to move around and start combats if I want to. Perfect, it seems to work. Here we go. So now you know how to create as many overworld as you want, and you can take all the units in the overworld and ask them to move around. The player should be able to select all its unit and then trigger combats as many times as he wants, which is starting to look more like a real game, because in a real game, well, you don't have a debug menu all the time. Yeah, that's not made for the player, that's made for us. But anyway, now you have 3 levels in your game in which the player is going to move around, ask the unit to move around, trigger combats over and have some fun. And if you want to go back to the level containing the debug menu, you can always go back to the level entry, and that's going to display the debug menu as before, and you can debug all the features you want in your game. But anyway, I guess that's gonna be it for today, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye bye!